Hi, I'm Doug Morwood, and I'm going to be exploring the need for change, key trends, and how can we navigate this uncertain landscape. I'm focusing today on the built environment, but our solution is agnostic of sector or industry and is all about integration and optimization. So a brief agenda for today's webinar. First of all, an introduction to Insight Futures, what we're about, why the need for change, and some trends that we've explored, what we've found in our government-backed research and industry research, and what we can do to more intelligently integrate client demand and supply chain optimization. And then finally, just a solution in terms of the data-powered benchmark platform that we've developed that we think would be very helpful in that intelligent integration. So first of all, introduction to Insight Futures, or even to myself. My name is Doug Morwood. I'm the CEO of Insight Futures, and we really focus on systems change, working at a macro level, kind of global level or a country level or even a city level. The meso level, working with organizations, public sector, private sector, and even on the micro level, individuals and the mindset shifts that are required to actually create more sustainable value going forward. So I typically work with companies, organizations, and key stakeholders to solve significant challenges in their ecosystem or market and to affect system change and new value networks. Insight Futures makes the case for a radical shift in thinking to invest in the resilience and innovation readiness of cities, business, and organizations in order to meet the needs of a hugely alternative future. We explore what actions companies must take to remove the barriers preventing a full-scale shift to climate-neutral design, production, operations, supply chains, and business models. Insight Futures' mission is to help companies set a truly sustainable business path across key areas such as climate, circularity, and digital, and embark on the organizational and ecosystem transformation required to deliver this vision for the business and its stakeholders. We do this through 6 key areas: strategy and transformation, data and insights, technology and innovation, sometimes as a service, circular economy and systems practice, training and development, and implementation. So we're all about making possibility happen, thinking big but starting small, and we create positive impact by helping leaders seeking sustainable growth to design and create better futures. We've focused on place-based innovation, country, city level, and who are the multiple stakeholders operating within these cities, and how can we create repeatable systems for change, city by city, with models that work across multiple locations. So creating more sustainable cities through circular and digital innovation and driving towards net zero carbon. And our intelligent integration platform is really looking at how can we more intelligently help link demand and supply and these multiple stakeholders to cohesively and collectively create more repeatable value chains and sustainable futures. So the need for change. What drivers do we see? We're in a VUCA world. We're all experiencing for the first time in our lives a common experience around the world with the pandemic and that ongoing uncertainty in our personal lives and business lives, that complexity, ambiguity, and volatility. We need to be able to shift our mindset in order to navigate this now common landscape and one that's going to probably go into the future. We all know about COVID. We're going to have to learn to live with COVID. And again, the uncertainty that provides. But we're more adaptive and resilient than we think as individuals and organizations. The climate emergency, we can't ignore it. We're in the decisive decade. It's 13 years since the financial crash. That's gone in a heartbeat. It's only 9 years to 2030. So we really need to accelerate any transition and a just transition to more net zero economy, social and local circular economies that can support that, and using digital and data as a way, in an ethical way, that can support our ways of tackling the climate emergency. In some parts of the world, there's too much water, and in others, there's too little. There'll be probably conflicts over lack of water in this decade. In 2017, World Economic Forum, they carry it out every year, but resource risks are within business planning horizons. And if you look at the likelihood, 2 out of the top 5 were environmental challenges, extreme weather events, and natural disasters. In terms of impact, 3 out of the top 5 were environmental. Move forward to 2020's report, and you can see that the top 5 are all environmental in likelihood, and 3 out of the 5 in terms of impact. We can't ignore the impact of climate and the lack of biodiversity, or the loss of biodiversity, on our business planning processes and our horizon scanning. The world in 2030, what's it going to look like? Well, there's going to be 1 billion more people, 2.5 billion more middle-class consumers, which is double today, and they're going to require and want the same things that we've been used to, I suppose. There's going to be, as a result, 30 to 80% higher demand for commodities, and as mentioned earlier about the water demand gap, it's going to lead to significant strategic positioning and even conflict. By 2050, 68% of the world's population will live in urban centres, 52% today. That's going to put increasing pressure on already creaking cities and towns, which are having to be repurposed today in terms of people returning to work or working from home. So is this an opportunity, a threat? Let's explore further. UN Global Compact a few years ago put together the 16 or 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And it's worth having a look at this because it's driving ESG, or environmental, social and governance investing. It's driving the FTSE and Standard & Poor's Index in terms of corporate social responsibility, and political will in terms of policy and legislative planning. So it's something that's definitely to take note of and see how you can contribute to these global goals. What's the effect of digital? You know, Industry 4.0 is already here. We just really need to be looking at how we can adopt and utilize automation and digital Industry 4.0 opportunities that don't just displace workers today, but that can perform tasks that we may struggle to do safely, or they can be done better and more efficiently. But where's the creativity and the opportunity to reskill or upskill our human workforce to be able to ensure employment and engagement going forward? We're on the cusp of a revolution. I think it's already here. Everything will be connected. There are more sensors than, I think, people. We are increasing the IoT infrastructure all the time. There has to be an ethical approach to this, obviously, but the data that's coming back from that can inform building management systems and the performance management of our built environment is increasing. I think largely the construction industry tends to just leave that data and not really look at it as a way to create new value for various stakeholders and customers. Maybe not just Bitcoin, but blockchain. How can we create more distributed ledgers that can create more trust and confidence within the contracting and the engagement and the value exchanges that go on within the construction industry and various other sectors and industries, so that we can have more integration and optimization with our clients and the design teams and the supply chain? What about making new ways of making things in terms of Industry 4.0, modern methods of construction, standardization, adaptability, whole life cost approach, and the new decision makers in terms of machine learning, AI? How's that going to improve our productivity, our efficiency, and support the transition to a more sustainable future? As William Gibson, the author, said, the future is already here. It's not evenly distributed. And I think that it only takes a quick glance out the window to see how different technology, the differences technology has made and will continue to make. So what do you see? What about linear business models? They aren't sustainable. We have a take, make, waste approach to our value chains, which are highly inefficient. We take materials out of the ground, we make them into a product, we sell it, and it tends to be used sometimes just once and thrown away. Surely we can design better, more circular solutions and business models that will optimize products and services or materials for as long as possible. We'll design out waste and that we can regenerate natural systems. There's structural waste designed into our mobility systems. Before the pandemic, the typical time that a car was parked in Europe was 92%. Most of our cities and towns are given over to cars and vehicles. What if we repurposed them and had out of town parking areas for autonomous vehicles? We had access to mobility as a service instead of ownership. What would that allow us to do in terms of redesigning our cities, our towns and urban environments, and even our rural economies? And the structural waste in the built environment is huge. Before the pandemic, again, only 60% of European offices are used, even in working hours. the amount of waste that's generated just in an actual process of the design and build approach is huge. Again, the emissions are huge. We're 40% of most of the emissions, we're 40% of the materials used. And there's a huge amount of waste at the end of life when we just demolish most of the buildings that haven't lasted as long as they were originally designed for. The construction industry accounts for approximately 60% of UK materials use, and it generates 47% of UK carbon emissions. 80% of those are from buildings already in use. So buildings in use. And we need to look at not just new build, but retrofitting. So these are big, big challenges, but there are lots of opportunities to tackle them. But we have to decouple our development, our business development, our social development in terms of society and economies from resource use and environmental impact. If we don't do that, then we're going to run up against increasing problems and the fragility of global supply chains and access to finite materials that we're experiencing because of the Suez problem or Brexit or the pandemic. Is that an indicator of what could happen if the climate emergency really takes hold? So how can we redesign our processes, our systems, our business models, our ecosystems, our economies, that we can decouple that development and growth from the finite resource and negative externalities? According to research, the cost of operating a built environment asset over a 30-year period can be 4 times the cost of designing and constructing it, and that 80% of the operation, maintenance and replacement costs can be influenced in the first 20% of the design process. If you think about that for a second, you know, the typically kind of siloed approach that the construction industry has in terms of its contracting management and its risk management is that each contractor or stakeholder at that particular stage in design or concept, and then design, the pre-construction, construction, handover, operation, end of life, are really only interested, unless you're the client or the investor and you're looking at it over a longer period of time. Most of the focus is on your part of that chain, and you need to be economically rewarded for the value you contribute at that point. But it's, as I say, salami sliced. We're not looking at the whole sausage. And how do we look at it from a short-term cost approach instead of a whole life value approach, which allows us to design for longevity, look at the CapEx and the OpEx coming together as a TOTEX, and even at the CARBEX, the carbon expenditure as well. So do you also see this? A lot of our clients, a lot of the people we work with, either put their head in the sand because they first of all don't want to see what's out there because of the ability to address it, or they're largely unaware because of the busyness of business as usual. We're trying to get back from the pandemic to some sort of certainty. And these trends, which ones are important, which ones are relevant, which ones should we focus on? So sometimes it can be a bit of an overwhelm. So what's happening a bit more locally and in UK markets as well? First of all, we all know about net zero carbon targets. Government, for example, in the UK have set 50% reduction for the construction industry in greenhouse gases, 33% reduction in capital and whole life cost of buildings. Net zero economy 2050, 2045 in Scotland. And at cities, many cities have set net zero carbon targets by 2030. In fact, globally, there are 1,990 local authority areas, local governments, or even national governments that have set binding commitments to addressing the climate emergency through net zero declarations. That's covering over 1 billion citizens. So we're certainly on the way in over 34 countries. Here in the UK, there are 510 governments or local authorities that have made these commitments. So there's certainly a move in that direction. And what does that mean from a national government point of view, a local authority point of view, in terms of legislation, policy, even taxation? Is there a big stick coming? Are you ready for it? Or is there potentially a more cohesive, collaborative approach to creating the more enabling conditions for a transition towards a net zero carbon economy? The construction industry, supported by UK government, is also have produced a number of documents, including the construction playbook. There are many, many others I could refer to. Here in Scotland, there's a construction leadership forum that have also put together a recovery plan. But if you notice in the contents, the focus on pipeline, the certainty and the confidence that comes from an assured pipeline. Longer term contracting, again, that confidence in investing and then developing your capacity and capability, your skills, your people, attracting talent. But modern methods of construction, how can we standardize, harmonize, digitalize, and embed digital technologies? We have to have that integration, not just at the client side or at the design side, but through the main contractor and right the way through to the OEM and all the SMEs and subcontractors and suppliers that are in the middle. 95% of the construction industry in most sectors and most other industries are made up of SMEs, and 93% of them are micro businesses. So their support has to be provided to the smaller companies so that we can get full integration and optimization. So how can we also look at successful relationships? There's a lot of great relationships in this industry and many others. But actually, we found when we were looking at some of the research and the workshops we were doing across the last few years, there was a high degree of trust between individuals, but a low degree of trust between companies, which was interesting because of the risk profiling and the passing on of risk from client through to main contractor to the supply chain. And sometimes the reward is not always reciprocated. So how can we move forward to get a green recovery? And there are, again, a number of different documents that I'm referring to here from the Construction Leadership Council. They're looking at 3 stages: restarting, and this was a few months ago, obviously just after the pandemic hit, where they're looking at restarting, then resetting, but interestingly, reinventing. How can they transform the industry, or how can we transform the industry together, deliver better value through collaboration and partnership? They're looking at key outcomes in terms of different ways of procurement. There has to be a level playing field, focus on whole life cost, not value, not lowest cost. Reskilling and upskilling is a huge area of improvement for many of us, having to adopt digital, adopt new ways of thinking, and we're going to have to train up and reskill or upskill in order to do that. What if we do that all together collectively, and the support is there to do that? We need to look at safety. Obviously, Grenfell is an ongoing saga and disaster for the industry and for the people who suffered. And we really need to make sure that we don't make the mistakes again and the lessons are truly learned. But that's a legacy challenge that we still have to face. But we need to make sure that we do it right first time going forward. And how can we address net zero carbon? It's a global problem, but it's one facing the industry and a big contributor to emissions to collectively and cohesively come together through collaboration and innovation. So, as I mentioned, Construction Leadership Council in the UK, Construction Leadership Forum here in Scotland, where I am in Glasgow. And again, it's looking at some of the big impacts, the gross value add, the number of employment jobs created or supported by the industry. The number of small businesses here are 99% make up the industry here. And the action plan is focusing on 5 key areas: pipeline and commercials, again, that security of demand, skills and workforce in terms of upskilling and reskilling, transformation, and you notice it's not transition, supply chain resilience and capability. So how can we be fit for purpose today, but also for the future? And what's the capacity and capability building that may need to be required? And how can we use industry data and continuing insight to be able to adjust accordingly, not just reactively, but proactively? As I said, I'm here in Glasgow in November, hopefully this year. COP26 will be occurring. It's the biggest event Glasgow's ever held, one of the biggest in Scotland, I would imagine, and in the UK. And it's truly a significant opportunity since Paris to double down on the commitments that were made and to take them forward into binding targets for the whole world to commit to. We're working towards COP, but it's obviously beyond COP that all the action really needs to happen. We can't just keep on talking about things. We have to take action, and we can't do it in isolation. We have to do it collaboratively. And some of the challenges we have in the construction industry is around our contracting processes, around the ways that we typically exchange value, and we need to reimagine that. So what are the trends in the construction industry that we see or that we have covered in the research? Here's some technology trends around big data. We don't really use data as much as we should. BIM is still not rolled out cohesively across the whole of the industry. And some of these things that are here about, robotics and drones, Internet of Things, AI, machine learning, VR, AR, blockchain technology, they're all kind of buzzwords and people are aware of them, but how much are they being is there a mobilization or implementation? And are these trends something that you see? Protective equipment, there's certainly health and safety developments in terms of exoskeletons to be used to help safe lift heavy loads. There's a growing need for people and talent. We've always had a skill shortage in the construction industry, but I think we sell ourselves short in terms of the new digital requirements, data requirements for many people to come into the industry, and the diversity that needs to be offered in terms of going beyond just white males. We also are being hit by rising material costs. We know that we've had a spike there because of Brexit, pandemic, maybe the Suez incident, but is that something that we're going to have these uncertain fluctuations, not just of the costs going up, but access to the materials and resources that are required? Construction management software, focus on retrofitting, smart cities, modular. These are all things that you'll be aware of. Specialization, value chain control, consolidation. Is there going to be some consolidation? There are new entrants as well, number 10 on the third list, disrupting current business models, coming into the industry, not looking at really building things, but actually getting access to the data. A number of failures recently with Katera and Google trying to do sidewalk labs in Toronto, for example, is that they just couldn't get over the lack of trust around Google looking to get access to data. Katera did try and revolutionize the supply chain by taking an awful lot out the middle side and working directly with the client, but did come a cropper, although it was had raised $1 billion investment from SoftBank. We shouldn't say, "Oh, told you so, it's not as easy as you think," technology companies. I think we should learn from how we can blend what we do really well in the construction industry and problem solving, and getting things working under very difficult conditions on site, to using technology and some of the other industries just-in-time processes, or turning more to manufacturing as an industry, so that we can create repeatable conditions for success. So we've been here before. There are many reports into the industry. This one said that we should drive culture change in the construction industry through procurement reform, a more collaborative approach with earlier contractor involvement and better training. Unfortunately, that was from the Simon Report in 1944. I wonder if we still need to do that today. So we're very slow to change as an industry. And many people have tried to advise industry and suggest it should do certain things. I think the pressure is on us externally from these forces, these trends, these changes, the impending changes from legislation, policy, taxation, client needs, customer needs, consumer needs. But we really will need to change. We can't keep doing the same thing, hoping for a different result. But to change is difficult. Not to change, though, is fatal. And I think there are going to be casualties, as Mark Farmer said in his report, Modernize or Die. Well, there it's all in the title, isn't it? If we don't modernize, if we don't get with the program, if we don't start looking at recombining our assets and resources in more compelling ways for our customers and other stakeholders, then we're not going to be here. So why is organizational change so hard when it is so necessary? We can be aware of the need for change and still not really change. A huge part of that is around mindset. We just, if we did this before and it didn't work, or we've got loss aversion, there's afraid of failing in a new environment. We sometimes resist change as a way to gain strategic advantage. That's internally within one organization, not necessarily across a supply chain or a value chain. So we don't give access to ourselves within organizations. We're siloed. This is my ball and you're not playing with it. There are no appropriate systems or rewards, or there's different incentives in place, short-term, immediate, instead of long-term and sustainable. There's a dominant logic sometimes. That's not the way we do things around here. And culture does eat strategy for breakfast, as Peter Drucker said. There's peer pressure and influence, lack of sponsorship, lack of engagement, undue complexity. We're overwhelmed by the VUCA world, as I said at the start. And communications maybe not great. And also there are significant switching costs from moving from what you know how to do into something that you're maybe less sure of. So there's a loss aversion. I know this isn't optimal. In fact, it could even be suboptimal, the way I'm doing things just now. But you know what? I know how to do it. And I don't know how to do that thing over there. And even though this isn't great, there's risk in doing something I don't know exactly how to do or what to do. There's a perceived risk. And I think perception of risk is higher than the actual risk. In fact, there's a greater risk in sometimes doing nothing or just staying with the status quo. Personally, there's status anxiety. I'm a senior person, I know what I'm doing. And here's this, you're telling me after 35 years in the industry that, it's no longer relevant and I have to do something different. This 20-year-old's come in and tell me I have to do. Reputational risk. I don't want to, risk my reputation. I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm doing. In fact, nobody at a senior position will want to admit that they are uncertain or don't know what to do. And yet that is a common experience for all of us. As I said, in the VUCA world, there's that ongoing uncertainty, not just in our businesses, but whether we can even book a holiday. Fear of failure, resistance to change, short-term focus, no long-term view, the busyness of business as usual, our culture. Is it enabling or is it a barrier? Lack of incentives, we're in our comfort zone. And yet to change, we really need to get out of our comfort zone, because it is where the magic happens. It is where the innovation happens. It's when we stretch ourselves. Look how adaptive and adaptable we were when we were hit by the pandemic in terms of working from home, the technology shift that happened immediately, the vaccine that's come together in such a short period of time. When we put a collective will together to achieve something, it's incredible what the results can be. We just don't put ourselves in, we choose not to really put ourselves in that position very often. As Peter Drucker said, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And I do think that we've got a chance to create the future as we want to see it, as we come together. But it has to be a coalition of the willing. It has to be made up of people who are significantly up for it. So what we've found in terms of our explorations and this workshops and with the client work we've been doing, one example was in Union Terrace Gardens in Aberdeen. And we basically were looking at getting together. This was supported by Circular Aberdeen, Zero Waste Scotland, and we worked with Aberdeen City Council and Balfour Beatty to explore how the client, Aberdeen City Council, could explore circular economy opportunities on the Union Terrace Gardens project, which was it's like the centre of the city, a public realm space with gardens and facilities, and it was needing updated. But they were looking at exploring what the CapEx implications were, the OpEx implications, and essentially how could they explore with the client, the client with the main contractor and the supply chain to collaboratively address some of the challenges, innovate some of the options to bring about maybe circular solutions and whole life value opportunities. And this was really just a case of essentially joining up the thinking between the client, the main contractor, and the supply chain. And we looked at some of the barriers, and again, cost, focus, design constraints of the project. If there's not enough early engagement from the supply chain, then a lot of the opportunity is left behind. The way we think is a significant mandate and commitment, and the change requirements in terms of also looking at whole life cost and value in terms of the budget, the CapEx and OpEx budget. And do we have the time? An awful lot of the time we're on program, we're in penalties if we go beyond program, and once we start kick that off, you're pretty much running just to keep up. Another one we did recently with the Supply Chain Sustainability School was a workshop with a number of their members to explore again how could the client requirement be integrating much more optimally with the supply chain. And we looked again at supply chain optimization, and we again gathered a number of insights from the perspectives of the various people in the workshop. And this has been a common thing. I would say that most people, when we do this in terms of answering any of these questions, this one particularly, is that the built environment construction industry is ripe for disruption. But that's been something that we've been gathering for the last 5 or 6 years. But when is it going to be disrupted? We also looked at the trends that are affecting the construction industry and where you think the industry is in terms of unaware, aware, mobilized, and implemented. And as you can see, we're hovering below in the kind of aware, but nobody really mobilizing and nobody really implementing in terms of how we address whole life costs, net zero carbon, digitalization, data analytics, circular economy, and skills development. We've carried out a number of industry surveys, and we carried out one in association with Shaw Contract that's going to be available at this event. How might we de-risk the move to a circular economy for the built environment? And again, looking at the trends that are affecting the industry, how aware, aware, mobilized, and implemented. And we saw that there was quite a lot of awareness around each of the topics, but not as much in terms of mobilized and actually a lot less in terms of implemented. The highest we could see in mobilization was in digitalization and skills development. We asked around a number of questions, and again, the full report is available if you want to get in touch with us to get that. But local products and services are seen as a key part of the circular economy vision. Again, there was a strong agreement, or an agreement, a strong agreement. There was the majority in this as well. And we got a few responses, and I think that looking at circular economy and digitalization as an enabler to drive towards net zero carbon and for the whole industry to move towards this whole life cost approach, this was one that we thought was particularly interesting from one of the participants. The use of consistent industry metrics to help evaluate the impact are required on every project. This will allow baselines to be established, targets to be set. Just now, measurement is too inconsistent to help better inform the choices. There is a need for a centralized source of data to consolidate the message and communicate it with authority. So it's not that we don't have the data, it's just not analysed and relevantly to be presented to help inform design and better decision making. So supply chain optimization. And this is about optimizing profitability, margins, productivity, efficiency. It's an economic opportunity that we can utilize the approach to the climate emergency as a way to create differentiated and compelling advantages. So how do we do that? We have to integrate customer needs with supply chain optimization. At the moment, it's a bit of a chicken and egg, which I'll mention later. And that needs to be of the left-hand side of this slide. We need to stop pushing our products and services to the customer, irrespective of relevancy or demand. So starting with our business plan or business strategy or business model, number one on the left-hand side, and from that, creating products and services, which half the time we're hoping will be relevant to our customer needs, solving our customers' problems and challenges. We suggest we really should start with the customer. Who is your customer? Who's your main customer? What are their unmet needs? Do you really understand their challenges and jobs to be done? Can you identify their needs? And then can you develop the new products, existing products or new products and services that absolutely fit their needs? So there's a product service fit or product market fit. And then how do you inform your business model on a continuous basis due to the insight you're getting from these shifting customer needs over time? Because we really need to move away from this chicken and egg. At the moment, we see a lot of it on the client side and the demand side, speculatively exploring through tendering and procurement, whole life cost, modern methods of construction, net zero carbon, circularity or innovation. But they're uncertain about the capability and the capacity of the supply chain to deliver. So it's kind of not been asked for enough. But if it's not been asked for enough, the chicken, then the supply chain aren't going to invest and develop their capacity and capability to be able to offer the services that are required. So we have this kind of standoff. Chicken, is it we don't really know if we want it. Egg, well, if you're not really sure about asking for it and not creating a level playing field, then we're not going to invest in developing our capacity and capability. So we need to integrate the demand and supply and create much more of a flow and a resource flow and a demand flow that gives confidence to invest in developing capacity and capability. The other way we can look at it is, are we going to wait for an external force? Or can we see this as an internal opportunity with each of our businesses and organizations to scan the horizons, look for these unmet needs, and create differentiated opportunities that creates new market opportunities for you going forward? There are a number of barriers, as I mentioned earlier, about culture and belief on an individual organization and wider ecosystem level. We need to think differently. There isn't a level playing field around regulations, planning, policy, taxation, legislation, procurement, and that really is a challenge. We need to see leadership at all levels, but in the public sector, at government levels, to start procuring and really being consistent about how they're asking for, especially new build going forward, but retrofitting in the near future, so that it creates that level playing field. The market, the client gets what they pay for. So, if short-term cost is always the focus, then we're never going to get to whole life value. We need to look at the CapEx, OpEx, TOTEX, and CARBEX. There's a low adoption of technology in the built environment, lack of data gathering and analytics. That will change. And if you're not getting digital, if you're not looking at technology as a way to make you more efficient, productive, and relevant, then you need to move fast. And I think there is a general lack of understanding, or maybe just an overwhelming fire hose of data that we don't know what we need to focus on. So clarity, focus, understanding, education. We need to have a common language about addressing net zero carbon, circular economy, digitalization, these topics. If we can talk about it together and understand each other, then that's half the battle. And we need to really look at the knowledge sharing, the lessons learned, and spending more time in building that capacity so they have the understanding. We've kind of looked at some of these typical barriers, and we see these same ones coming up, and I've just highlighted these 7. Culture. So there's a risk aversion. Really is, we don't want to be, there's first mover disadvantage instead of a first mover advantage approach. The procurement, until it's asked for and looking at value, whole life value, then we're going to be short-term cost focused. And that just is driving the whole industry. And we can't continue to do that. I see that the public sector has to take a lead with that. And I think then the private sector will follow. Long-term governance, interfaces between stakeholders, from funders, from design, from clients, from the other stakeholders around the built environment and the construction industry, really need to be a better interface between academia, between industry, in order to create more efficient resource flows, knowledge flows, lessons learned, and new ways of working that become the norm. Mindset and dominant logic. We just need to move forward from an old way of thinking and doing, or just be open, a bit more open, even though we're experienced and long lasting in the industry. It doesn't mean to say we can't learn new ways of doing things. And I think that we've got to attract new talent and younger people into the industry, and we need to be embracing their technical capabilities, their ways of thinking, and see how that can inform the industry to modernize it. We need to address the skills shortages around future economy needs. We're going to need more heat source engineers instead of gas boiler engineers. We're going to, there's a huge opportunity here. Again, there's government commitment to funding this. We don't have as much as we need, but it's a step in the right direction. But we're going to have to address the skills shortages and attract, retain, and develop talent. Who pays and who benefits? There's an economic challenge here. There's a business case to be made, and I don't think it's yet made. So who is going to pay? Is it public sector that needs to create more enabling conditions, provide innovation funding, training support, and they benefit in the long run when we see it emerging through the construction industry back into the built environment assets that are more sustainable for the future. But the private sector has to take their part as well. And the big one that we see is, no, not yet, not yet, not yet. Oh, too late. And I don't think that's something you want to be caught in. So timing is key. And I think it is a blend of understanding, or at least having a consistent or a continuous look at the scanning horizons, scanning the trends, trying to understand what's relevant to your business model, and making the adjustments, even if they're incremental and micro adjustments on a daily basis, so that you're not having to do a major disruptive transformation because you're so adrift of the market. So how can we compete on climate action? And what does that really mean? So how can we integrate client needs with supply chain optimization? Why, how, and the benefits? Well, why? Net zero carbon, circular innovation, and digitalization are key drivers, not only to survive, but thrive in this decisive decade. According to our research, in order to do that, the most successful companies had or are developing these 4 key characteristics. Climate action, supported by strategic, distinctive capability. The approach to and management of innovation was enterprise-wide. Senior management was committed to innovation. The company made a significant strategic focus on climate-based competition. So we found each of these attributes present in the companies that were most aggressively pursuing climate action approaches to business and creating competitive advantage. So what's the process? Well, we need to define a program of work to implement this vision and strategy. And I think that there are a number of opportunities your clients may present to you where you can get together with multi-stakeholders, yourself, the client, your supply chain, to really explore how you can put together a common vision and then implement that with a clear strategy. So establish a clear climate action vision. Leadership provides mandate and sponsorship. Without that, it's very hard. You have to get that commitment from leadership, not just at the top of the organization, but throughout, so that you can develop knowledge and capacity and a learn by doing approach. doesn't have to be that you're going off to, online courses or night school or whatever, or college or university. You can do this in situ, on the job. And it's around partnerships and planning, engaging your customers in supply chain and collaborative workshops and coming together to really explore and unlock the latent potential that I think is locked in just now. And then measure the benefits. Take a data and evidence-driven approach. The data, and use platforms that are able to provide that analysis and presentation of data in a clear and concise way that allows you to make more informed decisions. So we have an Insight Futures platform, and we're developing that with the industry. And we'd be very interested if anybody wants to talk about this further, whether they think it would be useful for their particular context. So an introduction to the Insight benchmark and data platform. The REWA Plan of Works is a very powerful and utilized process, taking from 0 to 7, 8 stages, design, pre-construction, construction handover, in use. I think there should be a number 8 phase, which is end of life or reuse. But it's something that's utilized by the industry, and it provides a really good structure for information exchanges, for ensuring the most efficient way to design, build, maintain built environment assets. But there are certain flaws, not necessarily in the REWA Plan of Works, but in the contracting process. We have a number of different, as I said earlier, stakeholders who are really focused on their key part of this, their stage. And what we get is a disaggregated approach to the built environment asset, so that we don't get the sum of the parts as much as we should. So our approach is to create a more intelligent integration of client demand and supply chain value. And as I said earlier, we take a place-based innovation approach, looking at identifying a city that has made a net zero carbon target, binding commitment to that target, and then mapping that city through our city management assessment tool, and looking at the multiple stakeholders. And then we're really looking at a project that we can focus on that can bring together the client as a convening authority, and then the other stakeholders, funders, design team, engineering consultancies, and then on the supply side, the supply chain right through to the OEM, and also the legals, the insurance, the financials. So bringing them all together around that project, that's who are then focused on how that built environment project is going to contribute towards the city's net zero carbon approach, is really interesting. It all starts with a conversation, and then we start uploading the assessments that we do into the Business Resilience Innovation Platform that then gives us the data-powered approach for collaborative working. And it is really about collaboration. Data-powered approach to explore opportunities to create greater value for clients and the supply chain as a collaborative value network, not just once, but as a repeatable model for change, a system for changing the system. Here is a top-level kind of navigational model. I won't spend too much time going through this, but the main thing is that we've got a nice mnemonic around CIRCLE, which is commitment, insight, resilience, readiness, collaboration, leadership, and execution, all focusing on how we can drive towards that climate action. And what is the platform? Well, essentially, it's a high-level process. The high-level process is around really creating a baseline of you as a large organization, maybe, and then of your individual supply chain partners, establishing a current state. What's the baseline? Where are you now? What's your intention around your future? Where do you want to be? So we create benchmarks, and then establish the action state. What's the strategy and roadmap and how you're going to close the gap between your baseline and your benchmark? Not just on an individual level or a one organizational level, but across an integrated whole of client and supply chain. And I mentioned these, the CIRCLE approach is essentially really looking at commitment and then insight, and then how resilient are you today and how ready are you to transform or change. So in terms of doing these assessments and creating these baselines and benchmarks, why? Well, essentially top-level outputs from the organization assessment will include a score for your organization versus best practice. It's broken down by management indicators, transformation criteria, and other key indicators with a prioritized set of recommendations for improvement. So you know exactly where to heat seek into to recombine your assets and resources, to invest in the capacity and capability building directly in line of client need and client demand. And we can also provide recommendations for additional support provided by ourselves or third parties. Supply Chain Sustainability School is mentioned here, but we have partnerships with various other organizations who can provide the support that you may need, but you can invest with confidence because you know that there is the insight into what the market is requiring, gives you that confidence to invest in improving on your performance in the key area that is identified. So the wrap up is that, essentially there are always things going on at the macro level. There are trends, there are legislation, there's disruptions, and we are really just focusing usually as businesses on just business as usual and trying to do the best work we can to make a market, make a margin, and improve so that tomorrow we're still here and we're growing as we go. But that's no longer sufficient. We're going to have to be able to learn how to exploit our current business model, but also explore new business model options, but not just speculatively, with confidence, using data as a way to scan the trends, to pull the relevant ones for our particular business or context, and to be able to then confidently invest in improving our performance in light of these shifting customer needs or disruptive factors, so that we can move forward with confidence. So thank you very much for listening. Next steps, if you're interested, would be if you want to provide your contact details, if you're interested in having a benchmark assessment, or just generally if you want to have a chat just about the construction industry, about what's happening in it and potentially ways that you can create competitive advantage through dealing with climate action. Or if you want to get the full industry service report that I referenced in the webinar, then again, you can give your contact details. So thanks very much for listening. Thank you very much.